Hello, my name is Barry the Baron Rowland, and welcome back to the Baron's lecture series. In part one, entitled If Democracy is the Aim, Dotmocracy is the Game, I described a unique open-ended process that provides school, business, or community leaders with an effective tool to gather data in a meaningful way from staff, faculty, employees within an organization to better ensure and maximize commitment to planning. Often that involves the selection of a competent leader for an organization or unit within that organization. As I mentioned in part one of the lecture series, I have been very successful at finding competent leaders for public charter and private schools throughout North America. Although I completed over 200 successful searches in the educational field, I have done some in business and community groups. And the same principles and strategies are applicable to leadership searches. In the next 5 videos, I will outline the steps in the successful leadership search and what has worked for me to better ensure that only candidates with the highest level of leadership competency are brought to the table for consideration. I have made the presentation and accompanying slides more user-friendly for those outside the educational circle. Specifically, I will speak to the following areas: how to ensure a successful search, why hire a search consultant, the search process, interview questions, assessing candidate material, selecting semi-finalist and finalist candidates, the semi-finalist and finalist process, the finalist process, behavioral interviewing, reference and background checks, how to identify candidates with the highest level of leadership competency, and how to ensure a successful search. Let me say before we begin, I do have a sense of humor. And often these lectures appear to be a little more professorial and teacher oriented. And I guess that's probably because they have to be more specific for those people who want to follow step by step in doing their own particular search or hiring somebody like me. The first decision, of course, is to decide whether to hire a search consultant or whether to do it yourself. There are several reasons why hiring a search consultant makes sense. First of all, he or she will be able to set a beginning and end of the search, usually 3 to 6 months. Secondly, the search consultant will give you an outline, the entire process in a more business-like, and the depth and scope will cover sourcing candidates to reference checks and background checks. A search consultant will bring a national focus, which will provide more credibility to the search and, of course, magnify it and extend it. The search consultant will provide professional guidance to identify what needs to be in place, like a position description, a process for collecting and screening dossiers, developing a select pool. A search consultant will also provide professional guidance when structuring things like interviews, closing the candidate, transitions, offers. And finally, in summary, a search consultant will provide an overall unbiased, fair, and transparent comparative process. The general process to network with colleagues of similar organizations for recommendation makes sense. You interview 5 or 6 potential consultants by phone, narrow it to 3 or so, and invite them in on site to give personal presentation on what they can do. If you decide to go it alone, you'll have to consider some things. First of all, cost, whether or not there's expertise within the organization, the risk of failure. In some cases, the uniqueness of the position, however, would make it more obvious to conduct a search in-house. For example, if you were searching for a CEO for a school for the blind, there are only approximately 50 schools in the United States to draw candidates from. And it's possible that there's enough expertise within your own organization in order to provide support for an appropriate search without an outside consultant. It's also important to consider that consultant will put into place a process designed to minimize the risk of hiring a stranger. Whether you do it or hire a search consultant to do it, there is always a risk, and the key is to minimize it. As you can see, there are additional considerations on the slide that you're looking at that a consultant will introduce to mitigate against the failure of a new appointee. You can see the involvement of stakeholders in the process, which is important. Identifying issues and challenges so you target the appropriate candidates. Information on what has to be considered to attract and hire a candidate. And introduction of a method to build in accountability and evaluation of performance of a new appointee. Second slide will indicate to you the actual search process. And you can see that there are 6 key points in that entire process as you begin to work your way through. First of all is the pre-search consultation, and which aims at developing an in-depth knowledge of your organization. And there's such things that need to be looked at, like interviews. Are you going to have focus sessions? Identification of issues and challenges, search timetable, advertising strategies, and that's all part of the pre-search process. Secondly, you see the development of the school and position description. And this is a position description, not a job description. So you'll have such things as the history of the school, the history of the organization, the mission, the vision. Are there any exemplary programs? What are the issues and challenges? What are the job expectations, job qualifications, personal characteristics required, and compensation? So a position description wants to answer the questions a candidate might have covering in the waterfront so that they get it all on that particular piece of paper and therefore has as much information as they possibly need. Third, you can see the candidate identification and recruitment, and that will be thorough and in-depth. So there'll be a decision on network sourcing, phone screening, resume review, examination of leadership skill and philosophy, a detailed interview, summaries of top candidates. Number 4, assessment and evaluation of candidates, and this will be critical. I believe very strongly, and we'll talk shortly about it, in behavioral-based interview techniques. You need to have completed dossiers for review, and then, of course, identification of semifinalists and finalists. And finally, the presentation of finalists. You will certainly need direct assistance of a search consultant as a committee member or board member by developing an interview format, questions, a process of evaluation and ranking, extensive reference checks, and so on. So you can see that there's in-depth, and the expertise behind having a search consultant do this is very critical. The search methodology, as you can see, is based on an ongoing partnership and communication between a search consultant and the search committee or the board. And the process, of course, is, as you see here, should be sophisticated, nationwide, and extremely effective in identifying and delivering candidates for the position of responsibility. Also, as part and parcel of what the search consultant will do is develop a search schedule. And you can see here, I've given you a sample of a search schedule that's up there. And you can see that, it's very clear that it's self-explanatory, but detailed in terms of providing sort of a step-by-step set of objectives to keep everyone on track. It's not cut in stone, but it will help people to decide on and see what comes next in the process of search. One of the things that needs to be done as well, besides having a position description, which is pretty wide and varied, is to narrow the field. So what's going to be must-have and nice-to-have? And now we're doing the separation, the nice-to-have. And you can see this CEO profile I would hand out to members of the board who are making the decision. And I want them to do this independently in terms of their own ideas. Send it in to myself or the search consultant So he or she can do a compilation. And certainly the compilation, therefore, will help to decide. And here's a sort of a summary of that compilation that you put together once you receive all of the information and hand it in. It'll show you what everybody said, as you can see, but bolded in all of these things are what more than one person has said. So now you've narrowed the target with those who are making the decision. So there are no surprises. You don't need surprises at the end of the search to be bringing the wrong type of candidates to the table. And once you have agreement that these are the things that most people are saying are must-haves in the scheme of life, then you can continue with some assurance that you'll be able to target the right people and bring them to the table. So consensus is very, very important in all of this. And here you can see the remaining part of that under various headings. So you're pretty well assured that the individuals who will make the decision have identified the things that are most critical to them in this new appointee. And of course, from here, they can begin to develop fit type questions in preparation for interviews by simply developing questions from some of the bolded material. Here's an example of the position description. As I mentioned, it is not a job description. So you can see here that there's a full outline of what you're looking for. There's also areas that candidate would want to know about, all the way down to essentially personal characteristics that would be required for the search. So this is the start, and this will give you an opportunity to get the search underway. Once you have the position description completed and the CEO profile page done, you can then develop a set of questions for potential candidates. You can see here there are two groups of questions. The first would be written, and you can see numbers 1 to 7. You would expect people to address those in a succinct manner. The second group, number 8 to 12, are done in a cold call. So you call the individual up once you've evaluated the material that has come in, and you ask these questions over the phone. And that will give you a sense of the way an individual will write and also how they can speak. And that will give you a part of the dossier that will be included with the resume. And of course, with the resume, we recommend that you do not format it. You simply send it as is. You want to see how people put their resume together and how they organize their thoughts. This is all important to the process. I mentioned earlier behavioral interviewing, and in my view, this is the key area for looking at candidates and getting a better sense of them. You can see I've identified some things that are the rationale behind behavioral interviewing. The questions require specific examples and are open-ended. The candidate has the analogous experience, management competency, and personal success or not, and that will be determined when they respond to these questions. The information can be verified through reference checks that they give, and as can the last section of questions on the question sheet that I showed you earlier, that can also be used to verify reference checks. Basically, what a candidate does during the interview process under the behavioral interviewing is far more predictive of future performance. If you're looking for a superior communicator, observe how the candidate communicates, what he or she says. The second most predictive indicator is what the candidate did in a past analogous situation. So this will be gleaned through the candidate's own statements in the written and oral questions found in the dossier and from reference checks. And remember, the least predictive indicator of future performance is how a candidate responds to hypothetical work situations. What do you think is the best way to keep track of multiple tasks simultaneously, for example? These questions only reveal how well or how glibly a candidate performs in an interview. You want to make certain that the candidates who are very glib and can respond well in interview situations You have to drill down and give examples and be specific around the things that you are requiring them to answer. In this particular approach, if the behavior isn't forthcoming, you continue to work your way through the questions until you get exactly what you're looking for. Here's the package that you would use in the behavioral interviewing. I'm going to just run through it fairly quickly because there are many questions. You can use these at the semifinalist and finalist stage. You can see there are a number of questions on the one hand. On the other hand, you can see the set of rubrics each question has, and you can identify, comment, and evaluate their answers. Each question has a competency expected from the answer. Here's your group on vision, strategy, and implementation, leadership and management, programmatic leadership and builders, focus on outcomes, personal characteristics, and so on. And so that gives you a very good idea of what you're looking for. And you can see as well, at the end of a behavior interview, there are two very key and important questions that you need to ask. One is with respect to candidates' background and reference checks. You ask them specifically if there's anything in their background that might impact on the decision to offer them the position. It's very important that they give that right up front so that they have now gone on record in terms of what you're looking for. This particular interview can take up to two hours. Sometimes search committees want to look at a 1 hour behavior question format. Here it is. It'll give you an idea of what it looks like and how you put it together and so on, because you can also get the information as well off that. Fit type questions are also developed by the search committee. So your interview must encompass behavior interview questions and fit type questions that will be developed from the CEO profile that I spoke about earlier and the position description. And these are questions directly related to fit for the job. It's a different matter to be fit for the job and to be competent for the job. They're not always the same. And so it's important to narrow the field based on both of those areas. And so you can see there are several there that are examples that I pulled out of the information that you had. Here's a way of evaluating the candidates that you spoke with. This is a set of rubrics that people can take with them, and they can put candidates' information on there, come back with an evaluation and a summary in terms of selecting candidates for the semifinalist and, of course, the finalist stage of the search. In the next few slides, I've indicated some thoughts on reviewing the pool for semi-finalist and finalist selection. One of the things that I like to do is to value the selection committee's decisions individually. And so what I suggest is that people take away their notes from behavioral interviews, their comments. They also have a set of rubrics that everyone's agreed to evaluate candidates with. Go back to their home base, read through the material, make their choices individually. Now, for semifinalists, it could be 1 to 10. For finalists, it could be 2 or 3 of their choices. They come back then as a group, and each individual on a blackboard or flip chart paper put up their choices. And then everyone can have a look without a discussion. Normally, you will find that most people select 1 or 2 candidates unanimously who they wish to bring in at a semi-finalist or finalist selection stage. Remember, you're not picking anyone yet. You're just bringing them in for interviews. And of course, a discussion then can narrowly focus appropriately on candidates who some people have high on their list, others have low. So let's discuss them and make up the difference in that discussion. So that way you're able to not only value each person's decision, but then collectively make decisions on individuals who everyone had different opinions about. Now, when you're looking at interviews for semi-finalists, you can do about 3 in a day. They're 2-hour or 90-minute interviews, and so they're lengthy, but it's important that happens. There are a couple of things that you should bear in mind in terms of selection of candidates. One thing is that as you go through the resumes and written material, you're going to find some individuals who may be very compelling, but there might be something in their material that give you pause. And I think there are several things you should do before making a decision. I call it a quarterfinalist interview. So you can either not take action, decide, no, we're not going to do that, bring this person forward, or you can break your group up into small teams to interview the candidates and ask them to speak to certain areas that you had some concerns about. Or you can have them write responses to that in terms of a written response to those areas. And then you review that information and then decide. The other option, of course, is to simply bring them forward and pose the questions at the interview. So don't give up on people without at least making a decision to either follow up or not before making a final selection. The other area that you might want to talk about, and it's very important, is to ask candidates, particularly at the semifinalist stage, and of course it'll also be at the finalist stage, about their total compensation package. I know that you've put a salary scale or a grid, whatever you may want to call it, a range, if you will, on the job. But when the water hole gets smaller, the animals look at each other differently. So when they know they're seriously being considered, sometimes things move in a different fashion. So I think one of the things that's very important in determining whether a person comes forward, particularly at the semifinalist stage, because they will also be finalists, is what they're looking for with regards to a total package. And that'll give you a better indication of, do we want to bring this person forward? Can we negotiate? What do we think? Assessing the dossiers is another thing you need to consider. The dossier is made up of two parts. The resume, which they have put together unabridged. It's not a standard format because it's important, I think, you see how people organize themselves in terms of their resume. And, of course, the answer to the questions, both in writing and also verbally. And so that's what you have in your hand. I think that one of the things you soon find out is that there are differences in people's careers. Some people stay in one place a lot longer. Some people move around a lot. Neither of those things are necessarily good or bad. So I think what you need to do is, and I've outlined several questions you need to ask yourself as a committee member, why you think that individual has had job transitions. And these questions, of course, will give you a better sense of what you're looking at in terms of people's careers. And if you don't get the answer, you can certainly ask when you decide to bring that person forward, if you do, to interview them. In video number 4, I'm going to present a few slides that will give the search committee or board some suggestions and protocols regarding the finalist interview days. And you can see here there's a number of things that need to be considered when you're working through the development of a search. Besides that, there's other areas you need to take a look at. And these are very, very important because the candidates are also measuring you as well as you measuring them. So it's very important that all of the information that's in these particular slides are considered when you're bringing finalists in to make a decision on an appointee. This particular slide is designated for the chair of the search committee or the chair of the board. It's a little narrower in focus, but it also gives the chair the idea of what has to happen next and a sense of what they have to do preparing for finalist days. Here is a sample schedule, and you can see the days tied up and very tightly with interviews, with tours, with meeting various people formally and informally. So getting to know the candidate and also the candidate's significant other or spouse, if that's appropriate, because all of that will have to be considered in a candidate making a decision to accept an appointment. The candidate certainly will have to give a presentation, and here is an example of a 15 to 20 minute presentation, and what the candidate would be expected to do and present. I mentioned earlier in one of the videos that it's important to have your stakeholders involved in this, and you're going to see in a moment there are two feedback type forms, one for the stakeholders in the audience and the other for the board members who are looking to make the decision. This particular slide will give you a sense of what you need to do for a public presentation. I would not recommend that you hand out resumes, but simply have a précis prepared. You can do it, or you can have the candidates do it. If you don't, what will happen is some members of the audience will inevitably contact a former, particularly a recent and a current employer, if they happen to know them, to get a lead on them. And of course, although your reference checks, and we'll talk about those later, will have to cover all of the referees, the immediate supervisor is held off until a decision is made on an appointee, subsequent to a recommendation from the current employer. So you don't want anyone making that call, because in some cases people have not indicated that they've applied for a position. Here is one of the evaluation forms, and this would be one that would be used more by the search committee or the board in their interview process, probably the board, to give an evaluation of the candidate. And here's the form that you would use for employees or staff. And you can see there are some simple questions. Nowhere on here, nowhere on this form does it indicate who you should hire. That's not the business of the employees or staff. They want only to be part of giving you some feedback. You're responsible as a board to hire the individual, and you're accountable for that hire. But this will give you a sense of what people in the audience thought as they listened to the presentations. You can get more informal in a coffee and gathering over food between presentations, where people can talk back and forth. It's very important that you do not allow questions from the floor. Some of them would not be appropriate. I've seen that happen. And you don't want to get into a debate between someone who has a different sense than everyone else in the audience and the candidate. As they say, share it tightly, and have any informal questions go on at a kind of an informal gathering after presentations. This final video will speak to the very important process of reference checks and background checks. You can see on the screen what you would ask semi-finalist candidates to provide to you, so that you're prepared when they, and if they become finalists, to move ahead with reference checks. The video that you see now would be what you would use as a board member or a member of the committee as you call and contact referees and ask them questions. And you can see a list of 8 or 9 questions there that would be appropriate, right in the exact words that the individual says, so you can put together a composite on each candidate. You should find some relationship in the answers to those oral questions on the written answers back early in the process, with respect to what candidates said about themselves. One of the things that I always warn people about is not to do reference by Google. What search engine would you use? They're not valid. The only way that you can validate information is through a face-to-face reference call and background and criminal checks that also can be provided in terms of companies who do those things. At the same time, you may find that there are some areas of concern. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the process, there are several ways that you can do that. It might be a career path issue. It might be something they said during an interview, whatever it might be. You can decide not to move the candidate forward. You can conduct a mini or quarter finalist interview to get an answer. Ask for written responses, as I said earlier. Pose questions for a candidate at a meeting as well. Also remember that there are some very important questions that are introduced back at the behavioral interview stage. One requires candidates to announce to the committee if there's anything in their background or in their history that would impact on the decision to offer you the position. That's starting point. One will be having in mind their efforts at looking at similar jobs in the area. What would be a compensation package that they would expect? And the third is, if they're offered the position, what would you need to put into place to confirm their acceptance? Here's an example of background checks that can be done. All of these companies will conduct them, and it'll go as deep as you want in terms of background checks on candidates, and they must be done. I have to stress, you must do reference checks diligently, and you must do background checks. The following piece is what I call letter of intent, and you'll see that, and there's a couple parts to it. The letter of intent is a way of getting a candidate committed almost immediately if you decide to offer the appointment. It's important because generally contracts are more convoluted. They go back and forth, lawyer to lawyer. They take time. This letter of intent, essentially a two-pager, commits you as a board, as a school, as a community group, as a business to a candidate, and that candidate is committed to you. Here are some closing strategies for a CEO or leadership search, and I won't go through these bit by bit, but you get an idea once you read them that it follows some of the things I've already said, and make sure that you take these seriously and that you look at them carefully because, as I say, candidates are also evaluating you as a possible employer as well as you looking at them as an employee. I want to spend a little bit of time talking in summary form about how to identify candidates for the highest level of leadership search. As you can see here, and this is from my own experience over a number of years, a search must be active, not passive. You go and find people. You don't wait on ads and you don't wait for people to apply. You actively outreach, as it says, to people who are happy where they are, but they're ready for a challenge or a change in their location or in their position. All potential candidates are required to address a series of written questions that are directly related to the job expectations, and that's important and that's critical. Every candidate who is submitted must be interviewed personally, and that again is important. You review the responses to the written questions in that interview. You ask cold call questions because you want to see how people write and how people speak. The final pool candidate will include dossiers that include resumes plus responses to questions. And certainly that'll give you some written information, but it's only partway there. The behavioral interviewing technique is introduced at the semifinalist stage. It's a package, you've seen it here before, with questions and rubrics for evaluation of responses that will be addressed in the presentation. Reference checks must be done for all finalists, as well as background checks, and written reports prepared so the search committee or board can read them and get a sense of what they are looking for. And finally, how would you ensure a successful search? It's important to stick to the process since they are designed to open up candidates, reveal who they are in incremental steps, contain checks and balances, and avoid red flag issues that can negatively impact search if you don't do that. You base it on issues and challenges facing the school in the next 5 to 10 years, as opposed to trying to match or look for someone opposite from the person who is in the job or a personality. That will be doomed to fail, in my view. You have to base it on issues and challenges. Although candidate competency is important, you have to develop strategies and questions to determine best fit for the job. And as I mentioned earlier, they aren't necessarily the same. And your search consultant as well should be able to advise you if things are starting to move in a different direction, and keep the process moving in a positive manner. I would also recommend then that if you have questions and wish to contact me, it's barryroland4@gmail.com. And I'll mention that again, barryroland4@gmail.com. I'd be pleased to respond to anything that you have as far as questions are concerned, or if you have any suggestions regarding what you might do in your situation, or are looking for a consultant who might be able to advise you and take on a search, I'd be pleased to help with that.